Bride's family humiliated black maid. Mafia boss canceled the wedding. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Imagine yourself at a grand wedding. Everything set perfectly. The flowers, the cake, the guests all dressed to the nines. It's a scene straight out of a fairy tale. But hidden behind this perfect image is a heart-wrenching reality. A reality where power, privilege, and class collide. It was supposed to be one of the happiest days of Jessica's life. Her wedding to the man of her dreams, Richard, a man who had wealth, status, and a powerful reputation in town. Everything seemed flawless. But for one person, it would soon be a day of humiliation. Maria, the black maid who worked for the family, had been with them for years. She was a quiet, hard-working woman, always respectful, always humble. She had seen it all in the house, the lavish parties, the extravagant events, and the constant tension between the family's opulent lifestyle and the service that made it all possible. Maria had learned to blend into the background, never stepping out of line. But this day would be different. As the wedding began, the guests arrived, dressed in their finest clothes, murmuring amongst themselves, admiring the grandeur of the event. Jessica's family, however, wasn't as friendly. They had always looked down on Maria, making snide remarks behind her back, criticizing her accent, her clothes, and the way she carried herself. It was an unspoken rule that she was just a maid, a servant, there to do her job and stay out of sight. That afternoon, the comments started, first in whispers, then louder as the champagne flowed freely. One of Jessica's aunts made a remark about the maid's attire, asking how someone could work in such a position and still look so out of place. Another guest laughed, saying, "She's probably just lucky to be in this house, cleaning up after us." As Maria served drinks and cleared plates, she tried to keep her head down, doing her job without looking anyone in the eye. But the insults kept coming. Finally, one of the bridesmaids, a woman named Brittany, looked at Maria and sneered. "You don't belong here, do you? You're nothing but a cleaning lady, aren't you?" The words stung, cutting through Maria's quiet composure like a blade. She tried to breathe through it, trying not to let the humiliation show, but inside, it was different. Maria had endured years of these comments. But this was different. This was in front of everyone. This was at Jessica's wedding, a day when Maria should have felt like part of the celebration, not like an outsider. Just when Maria thought she could not take any more, the door opened with a powerful force, and in walked Vincent, the Mafia boss. The room went quiet. He was tall, his presence overwhelming. His dark suit, perfectly tailored, and his ice-cold expression made it clear that he was not someone to be messed with. The guests instinctively stepped back, the laughter fading, the whispers silenced. He walked straight to the center of the room, his eyes scanning the crowd before they landed on Maria. At that moment, everything changed. It was like the world stopped spinning for just a second. Jessica's family fell silent as Vincent walked toward Maria, his steps steady and deliberate. Jessica's father, who had been laughing at the jokes made about Maria, now looked nervous, uncertain. The entire room turned their attention to Vincent, who stood towering over the scene. Without a word, he looked at Maria and then, to everyone's shock, he turned and addressed the bride's family. "If you think you can treat people this way," Vincent said, his voice calm but full of authority, "then this wedding is over." The room was in complete shock. Jessica's father attempted to speak, but his voice faltered. Vincent wasn't finished. "I won't stand for this kind of behavior, not in my presence. Not to someone who has worked harder than any of you ever will." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling on Jessica. "You think this is just a wedding?" he asked coldly. "It's a reflection of your character. And I've seen enough." The guests were stunned into silence as Vincent's words echoed through the room. No one dared speak. Maria stood there, her hands shaking, but her heart began to beat with a new kind of strength. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. And just like that, Vincent canceled the wedding. The wedding that had been supposed to change Jessica's life forever ended in a single moment, all because of the way one woman had been treated. The family stared in disbelief as Vincent, the Mafia boss, walked out with Maria by his side. And with that, the world around them shifted forever. The room was still, the tension hanging thick in the air like a storm waiting to break. Maria, still in her maid's uniform, stood there, her heart racing, as the weight of the situation settled over her. The guests, once so eager to gossip and mock, were now silent, eyes wide with disbelief. Vincent, the Mafia boss, stood beside her, his presence a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded. The sudden silence was broken only by the sound of Jessica's father stumbling forward, trying to regain some semblance of control. "What is this? What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice trembling with anger and confusion. But Vincent did not flinch. His gaze remained cold and unyielding, as if he were a force of nature that could not be stopped. "Your daughter was about to marry a man who would humiliate someone in front of everyone. That is not something I stand for," Vincent said, his voice low but powerful, carrying across the room like a command. "As for you, treating people like that, someone like her, shows me exactly what kind of people you are." The guests shifted nervously, their eyes flicking between Maria and the Mafia boss. Jessica's face turned pale, her eyes filled with shock and something else, embarrassment, guilt, perhaps even fear. It was as if the world she had built for herself, a world of wealth and status, had suddenly crumbled in front of her. She had no idea that the man she had chosen to marry, the man she had trusted to protect her, would be the one who would be the first to fall. Vincent's eyes narrowed as he turned away from Jessica's family and looked directly at Maria. For the first time that day, Maria felt a strange sense of power. She wasn't the maid anymore. She wasn't the invisible woman who had been hidden behind closed doors for years. She was a person who was finally seen. "Are you okay?" Vincent asked her, his tone softer now, as he stepped closer. Maria, still processing the whirlwind of events, nodded slowly. She felt a knot of emotion tightening in her chest. It wasn't just the shock of the day, it was the weight of all the years of silence, of invisibility, finally being lifted. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice failed her. All the words she had wanted to say to Jessica and her family, all the things she had kept bottled up for so long, were caught in her throat. Vincent looked at her with an intensity that seemed to see right through her, like he could understand the depth of her pain without her needing to say a word. "You're safe now," he said quietly, his words a reassurance. "No one will ever treat you like that again." Maria couldn't help the tears that welled up in her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt heard, understood. The relief was overwhelming, and the anger she had buried deep inside her began to surface. She was no longer a servant in the shadows. She was someone who mattered. And Vincent, in his own way, had made sure of that. "Come with me," Vincent said, his voice calm but firm. He motioned for her to follow him, leading her through the stunned crowd. As they walked, Maria felt the eyes of the guests on her. But this time, it didn't matter. They weren't looking at her with contempt or mockery. They were looking at her with awe, with fear. The power of Vincent's presence had changed everything. Maria was no longer the invisible woman. She was walking beside the Mafia boss, someone who had just single-handedly changed the course of the wedding. And with each step, Maria's confidence grew. She had no idea what would come next, but for the first time in her life, she was standing tall. As they reached the exit, Vincent turned to her. "You deserve more than this," he said, his voice low but sincere. "More than being anyone's servant. I'll make sure of it." Maria looked at him, still processing everything that had happened. "Thank you," she whispered. Vincent nodded, his expression unreadable, before stepping outside into the night. The cool air hit Maria's face, a stark contrast to the tension inside the mansion. But even in the calm, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something new. As the door closed behind them, leaving the chaos of the wedding behind, Maria felt a new sense of freedom. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't alone. And for the first time in a long time, Maria knew that her life was hers to shape. The night air felt cooler than it should have as Maria stepped outside beside Vincent, her heart still beating with the weight of everything that had happened inside the mansion. The lights from the grand estate spilled across the driveway, casting long shadows that stretched beneath their feet. For a brief moment, it seemed like the world had paused, suspended between what had been and what was about to come. Maria wrapped her arms around herself, not from the cold, but from the rush of emotions she had been holding down for far too long. She had spent years in silence, years swallowing humiliation for the sake of survival. But tonight, something had broken free. Vincent watched her quietly, his expression unreadable beneath the soft glow of the outdoor lights. He did not speak, allowing her the space to breathe, to gather the pieces of herself that had been scattered across the ballroom floor. Finally, Maria found her voice. It was small, fragile, but steady. "I did not expect any of that," she said, staring at the gravel beneath her shoes. Vincent nodded slowly. "Neither did they," he replied, his tone level. "People like that never expect consequences." His words settled between them, heavy with truth. Maria looked up at him then, really looked at him. The powerful man who had walked into the wedding and altered the course of everything with a single decision. She had heard stories about him, whispers of his reputation, of the world he came from. None of those stories had prepared her for this moment. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly. "You did not owe me anything." Vincent's gaze softened, just a fraction, as he looked at her. "I do not like bullies," he answered. "And I do not tolerate cruelty." He took a step closer, his presence comforting rather than intimidating. "You have spent years serving people. Who never saw your worth? I saw it the moment I walked in." Maria felt her breath catch. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not as a servant, not as someone beneath them, but as a human being with weight, with value. She tried to speak again, but before she could, the doors of the mansion swung open behind them. Jessica came rushing out, her perfect white dress dragging through the dirt as she stumbled toward them. Her face was streaked with tears, a mixture of anger and desperation twisting her features. "Vincent," she cried, her voice breaking. "You cannot do this. You cannot just end my wedding." Vincent did not turn. His voice remained calm. "Your wedding ended the moment you mocked the woman who has worked harder than anyone in that house." Jessica shook her head, breathless. "You do not understand. This was supposed to be my future. This was supposed to be my life." Vincent finally turned to face her. "Your life is your own to live," he said, "but it will not be built on humiliating someone else." Jessica's eyes flicked toward Maria, filled with a bitterness that did not belong at a wedding, but belonged to someone who had just lost control of everything she thought she owned. "You ruined this," she hissed at Maria. "You ruined everything." For a moment, Maria shrank back, the old instinct to retreat pulling at her. But Vincent stepped in front of her without hesitation, blocking Jessica's line of sight. "Watch your words," he warned, his voice turning colder than ice. "She did nothing wrong. You did." Jessica's breath hitched at the finality in his tone. "This is not over," she spat. "I will not be made a fool in front of my family." Vincent stepped closer to her, towering over her trembling frame. "You made yourself a fool the moment you opened your mouth," he said, each word slow and deliberate. Jessica flinched, tears spilling anew, and without another word she turned and ran back inside, the train of her dress whipping behind her. Silence settled once again. Maria exhaled shakily, her entire body trembling with the release of everything she had been holding in. Vincent turned back to her. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "I think so." He studied her for a moment, then offered her his hand. "Come with me," he said. "You should not be here any longer." Maria hesitated, glancing back at the towering mansion she had served for years. The mansion where she had been invisible. The mansion where she had lost herself in silence. Then she looked at Vincent's hand. Steady, strong, certain. She took it, and as they walked away from the only world she had ever known, Maria felt something new settling into her chest. Not fear, not uncertainty, but the first glimmer of dignity returning to its rightful place. And she had no idea that this night, the night that had shattered everything, was only the beginning of something far greater. The next few days were a blur for Maria. She couldn't quite grasp what had just happened, or rather, what was happening to her now. The life she had known, the life of servitude, of being invisible, was slipping away like sand through her fingers. For years, she had lived in the shadows of the grand mansion, doing what she was told, never asking for more. But now, with Vincent's presence lingering in her life, she felt something stirring within her, a feeling she had not experienced before. Freedom. But what did it mean? How could she walk away from everything she had ever known? As they left the mansion, Vincent had offered to take her to a place where she could feel safe, far away from the eyes of the people who had belittled her for so long. The drive had been quiet, the hum of the engine filling the space between them. Vincent didn't speak much, but he didn't need to. His presence was enough. Maria had spent so much of her life in fear. Fear of rejection, of being judged, of being treated as less than human. And now, she was in the car with a man who was powerful enough to crush anyone who stood in his way, yet he treated her with respect, something she had never known from anyone else. As they approached a luxurious, gated estate on the outskirts of the city, Maria's nerves flared. This wasn't a world she was accustomed to. This place, with its tall iron gates and perfectly manicured gardens, felt like a different universe, one that was both foreign and intimidating. Vincent had turned to her. "This is my home," he said simply, as if it were nothing extraordinary. "You will be safe here." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Maria wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or afraid. "Safe?" she asked softly, her voice betraying her uncertainty. "Yes," Vincent answered, as he stopped the car in front of the entrance. He looked at her, his eyes softening just a fraction. "You've suffered enough. You don't need to live in fear anymore." Maria took a deep breath, feeling something stir deep within her chest. She had never allowed herself to hope before, but now, she couldn't ignore the tiny spark of possibility that had ignited in her heart. She stepped out of the car and followed Vincent up the stone path toward the front door. The house was grand, more grand than anything she had ever seen in her life. The tall columns at the entrance, the intricate carvings on the wooden doors, and the soft golden light spilling from the windows all made it seem like a place meant only for the elite, for the untouchable. But here she was, about to step inside. Vincent led her into the foyer, where a grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting soft light over the marble floors. "This is your home now," Vincent said, his voice low but firm. "No one will harm you here. You are safe. You are respected." The weight of his words hit Maria, and for a moment, she could only stand there, her mouth dry as she processed what he was saying. She was safe, respected, words she had never thought she would hear. "I don't know what to say," Maria whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't have to say anything," Vincent replied, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "Just know that you don't have to be afraid anymore. You are free to live your life, however you choose." Maria blinked back the tears that threatened to spill over. She had never imagined such kindness, especially not from a man like Vincent, a man who lived in a world of power and control, a world that had always seemed so far beyond her reach. And yet, here she was. As the days passed, Maria began to settle into this new life, this life that felt both strange and comforting. She was given a room of her own, no longer confined to the small, dimly lit space in the servants' quarters of the mansion. The room was simple but beautiful, with soft, luxurious fabrics on the bed and a view of the gardens outside. She could hear the birds chirping outside her window in the morning, a sound that made her feel like she was in a dream. But even as she adjusted to the comfort of her new surroundings, Maria could not shake the feeling that she was an outsider in this world. She had never been part of something like this. She had spent so much of her life in service, in the shadows, that it was hard to accept the fact that she was now being treated like an equal. Vincent had insisted that she take time to rest and adjust, but Maria couldn't help but feel guilty. She had always worked hard, always done what was asked of her, but now that she was free from the mansion, free from the people who had made her life miserable, she wasn't sure what to do with herself. Vincent, sensing her inner turmoil, spoke to her one evening after dinner. "You don't need to prove anything," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "You've spent your entire life working for others. Now, it's time to work for yourself, whatever that means for you." Maria looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "But how do I even start?" she asked. "I've never known anything else." Vincent smiled, though it was soft, almost gentle. "Start by living. Live for yourself. I can help you, but you are the one who will choose your path." And for the first time in a long time, Maria realized something. She could choose. She could choose what her life looked like. It wasn't all about service. It wasn't all about being invisible. She could be someone. She could be more than what she had been before. And in that moment, Maria felt the first stirrings of hope. a hope that she hadn't allowed herself to feel for years. Days passed, and Maria's world slowly began to shift in ways she could never have imagined. The mansion she had once served in felt like a distant memory now, a life she had left behind. Vincent had kept his word, giving her space, allowing her to breathe and reflect. Every day, she woke up in her new room, the soft golden light streaming in through the windows, warming the room with a kind of peaceful stillness. The noise and chaos of the mansion seemed like a lifetime ago. Yet, there was still something unsettling about this new life, something that gnawed at the back of Maria's mind. How could she reconcile the world she had left behind with the one she was now in? Vincent had been kind to her, far kinder than anyone had ever been. But there were times when Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong here. She had never been taught how to live for herself. She had spent her life in service to others, and now, she was expected to suddenly be something else. But where to begin? One evening, Vincent invited her to join him for dinner. It was a quiet affair, just the two of them, in the expansive dining room of his estate. The room was warm, lit by the soft glow of candles, and the aroma of fresh food filled the air. Maria sat across from him, still hesitant, unsure of her place. Vincent, as always, was calm, collected, his dark eyes watching her with an intensity that made her feel as though he was seeing straight through her. "How are you feeling?" he asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Maria looked up, surprised by the question. "I'm still adjusting," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. "It's just hard to know what to do with all this freedom. I've never had it before." Vincent nodded, a flicker of understanding passing through his eyes. "I know it's a lot to take in," he said, "but you're not alone in this. I can help you, but you have to take the first step." Maria hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. "What if I don't know what that first step is?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent leaned forward slightly, his gaze softening. "Then you start by choosing what you want. No one can decide that for you. You've spent too long living for others. Now, it's time to live for yourself." His words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long time, Maria felt a flicker of something inside her. Hope. It was a feeling she hadn't dared to acknowledge, a feeling she had buried deep beneath years of self-doubt and sacrifice. "But I don't even know what I want," she admitted, her voice trembling. Vincent smiled, the kind of smile that held both understanding and encouragement. "That's okay. We all start somewhere. But you have to be willing to find out." He sat back, allowing her the space to think. Maria sat quietly, her mind racing. What did she want? She had never asked herself that question before. Everything she had done, everything she had worked for, had always been for someone else. Her family, her employers. But now, with Vincent's words echoing in her mind, she realized that she had spent her entire life living for others. It was time to change that. But where to begin? She thought back to her time in the mansion, to the way she had always been treated. She had been invisible, dismissed, as if she were nothing more than a tool to be used. But now, here she was, sitting in a luxurious dining room, being treated with kindness and respect for the first time in her life. And yet, even now, there was still a part of her that felt like she didn't deserve it. That part of her that had been taught to accept less than what she was worth. That part of her that had been silenced for so long. But Vincent had given her a chance to break free. He had shown her a world where she didn't have to hide. A world where she could be seen. Maria lifted her eyes to meet Vincent's, her heart beating a little faster. I think I want to find out what I'm capable of," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but full of determination. Vincent's eyes softened as he smiled. "That's a start," he said quietly. "And I'll be here to help you, every step of the way." As the evening wore on, Maria felt a sense of calm settle over her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was just surviving. She was beginning to live. And in that moment, she knew that whatever came next, she would face it with strength and courage. She was no longer a servant, no longer invisible. She was Maria, someone who had been given the chance to rewrite her story. And for the first time in her life, she believed she could. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Maria felt herself changing. The luxurious estate had become her sanctuary, a place where she could finally breathe, but also a place that forced her to confront the parts of herself that had been buried for so long. She no longer wore the heavy burden of invisibility, She was allowed to take up space. Vincent had kept his promise, offering her a new world, one where respect and kindness weren't just words, they were a way of life. But even as she adjusted to this new life, there was still a question that lingered in her mind. What now? How could she begin to understand this freedom? How could she become the person she had never allowed herself to be? It was during a quiet evening that Vincent asked her to join him in the study. The room was bathed in the soft light of the fireplace, the shadows dancing across the walls. Maria hesitated at the door, unsure of what was coming next. Vincent's voice, calm and steady, called her in. "Maria, come in. We need to talk." She stepped into the room, the weight of the unknown pressing against her chest. Vincent was seated at the desk, papers and books scattered around him, his usual controlled demeanor in place. He looked up at her as she entered, his dark eyes piercing, but warm. "I know you've been thinking a lot about your next step," he said, his voice even. "It's time for you to choose what you want to do with your life. You've earned the chance to make that choice." Maria took a seat, unsure of what she could possibly say. It was overwhelming to think about. For so long, her life had been dictated by others, her duties, her obligations, the expectations placed on her. Now, the world seemed to open up before her, and she was expected to walk into it without knowing where to go. "I don't know where to start," she admitted quietly, looking down at her hands, twisting them together nervously. Vincent leaned forward, his gaze intense yet reassuring. "Start by figuring out who you want to be. Not who they told you to be, not who you were forced to be. Who do you want to be, Maria?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time, Maria didn't feel the need to hide behind a mask of silence. The truth was, she had never allowed herself to dream of a life outside of servitude. It had always been about doing what was necessary, about surviving. But now, she was being asked to think beyond survival, to think about living. I want to make a difference," she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I've always wanted to help others, to show people that they matter, but I've never had the chance to do that." Vincent nodded thoughtfully, as if he had been waiting for those words. Helping others is a noble path, but to truly help, you need to start by helping yourself. And that means finding your own purpose. Maria thought for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Helping others, that was something she had always felt in her heart, but she had never been able to act on it. She had spent so many years thinking of herself as nothing more than a maid, someone to serve others without ever asking for anything in return. But now, she was being offered the chance to be something more, to find a purpose that wasn't dictated by anyone else. "I don't know how to start," she confessed, her voice small but steady. Vincent stood and walked over to her, offering a hand. "You start by taking the first step, Maria. Don't worry about the rest right now. You have everything you need inside you. It's just waiting for you to discover it." Maria looked at his hand for a moment before taking it. It felt steady, sure. "And what if I fail?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Vincent's expression softened, and he gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Everyone fails, but the key is to get back up and keep moving forward. The only real failure is giving up on yourself." The sincerity in his words struck her deeply. He wasn't just offering her freedom from her past life. He was offering her the chance to build a future where she could define her own path. "I'll try," she said quietly, but with more determination than she had ever felt before. "I won't let fear stop me." Vincent nodded, his smile widening slightly. "That's all I can ask for." As Maria left the study that night, something within her had shifted. The heavy weight of fear that had plagued her for so long had begun to lift. For the first time, she felt like she was walking into a future of her own making. She had no idea what that future would look like, but for the first time, it felt like the possibilities were endless. And that, in itself, was enough to take the first step forward. It had been a week since Maria made the decision to begin forging a new life. The days had been filled with quiet moments of introspection and small steps forward, but there were times when the weight of it all seemed too much to bear. Vincent had given her the space to find herself, to explore what she wanted, but it wasn't always easy. Maria had never been the type to make decisions for herself. She had always been the one to follow orders, to live in the shadows, to make herself small so others could feel big. Now, she was learning to stand on her own, and it was more difficult than she had ever imagined. One evening, As Maria walked through the expansive gardens surrounding the estate, she felt a sense of calm. The flowers were in full bloom, the soft colors of pink, white, and yellow filling the air with their sweet fragrance. The evening sun cast a golden hue over the manicured lawns, and for a moment, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, appreciating the peace she had never experienced before. She had always been busy, always focused on what others needed, but now, she was finally able to take a moment to simply exist. Vincent had made it clear that he wanted her to find her own path, but he also understood that it wouldn't happen overnight. He had given her time, something that Maria had never had before. Time to think, time to rest, time to heal. But even as she stood in the gardens, feeling the cool breeze on her face, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still running from something. Running from her past, from the life she had left behind. Maria knew that she had to face her past eventually. She couldn't keep hiding from it forever. As much as she wanted to move forward, she had to confront the things that had shaped her, the things that had made her feel invisible for so long. It was that night, as she sat alone in her room, that she made the decision. She needed to face her past. It was the only way she could truly move forward. The next morning, she sought out Vincent. He was sitting in his study, as usual, surrounded by papers and books, his eyes focused on whatever task was in front of him. Maria stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him, before taking a deep breath and walking in. "Vincent," she said softly, and he looked up from his work, his expression calm. "I need to face the people who hurt me. I need to confront my past." Vincent set down the pen he was holding, his gaze shifting to one of understanding. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "But if you feel like it's time, then I'll be here to support you." Maria nodded, feeling a mix of fear and determination flood her chest. She had been running from her past for so long. It was time to face it. Over the next few days, Vincent arranged everything. He made sure that Maria would have the support she needed, that she wouldn't face this alone. He arranged a meeting with the lawyer who had handled the affairs of the mansion. Maria had avoided them for years, too afraid to confront the memories that still haunted her. But now, as she prepared to face those fears, she felt a new sense of strength growing within her. She was no longer the woman who had silently endured. She was someone who could stand up for herself, and she was going to do just that. The day of the meeting arrived, and Maria walked into the lawyer's office, her heart pounding in her chest. She was nervous, but she also felt a fire inside her, a fire she had never allowed to burn before. The lawyer, a man in his 50s with sharp features and a professional demeanor, greeted her with a cold, formal smile. "Maria," he said, "it's been a long time." Maria nodded, but didn't smile. "I'm here to discuss the terms of the estate," she said, her voice steady. "I need to know what happened after I left. I need to understand the truth." The lawyer looked at her with a raised eyebrow. "The truth?" he asked, clearly surprised by her request. "What exactly are you looking for?" Maria took a deep breath. "I want to know everything. I want to know how my life, my work, was treated. I want to know why I was made to feel so small." The lawyer seemed to consider her words for a moment before he nodded. "Very well," he said, "but I must warn you. The truth may be difficult to hear." Maria didn't flinch. She was ready. As the meeting continued, the lawyer revealed details Maria had never known. He told her about the way her work had been dismissed, how her contributions had been overlooked, how her very existence had been reduced to nothing more than a servant in their eyes. Maria listened in silence, the anger building inside her. But there was something else there too, something that made her feel stronger than ever. The more she learned, the more she realized that her past did not define her. She was not just a maid. She was someone who had given everything for others, and now, it was time to give something to herself. When the meeting ended, Maria stood up, her back straight, and her head held high. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Now, I can finally move forward." As she walked out of the office, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had faced her past, and in doing so, she had taken another step toward freedom. She wasn't running anymore. She was moving forward, one step at a time. After facing her past and discovering the truth, Maria felt a newfound sense of empowerment. The weight that had hung over her for so long had finally begun to lift. She had come to terms with her history, understanding that the mistreatment she had endured did not define her. But now, She was left with a crucial question. What would she do with this freedom she had fought so hard to attain? The mansion, the life she had once known, seemed like a distant memory, something she could never return to. She had moved beyond that. Vincent had offered her a chance to carve out a future for herself, a future where she wasn't bound by the past or by others' expectations. As she sat in the garden one afternoon, Maria's thoughts wandered. She looked at the vibrant colors of the flowers around her, each one blooming in its own time, its own way. She had never allowed herself to grow like that. She had always been too focused on surviving, too worried about what others thought. But now, it was her turn to bloom. Vincent had given her space to breathe, to discover who she was, but it was up to Maria to take the next step. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be moments of doubt, times when the old fears crept back in. But for the first time, she felt ready. She knew she needed to start small. Vincent had suggested she begin with something that had always been close to her heart, helping others. Maria had always found comfort in the idea of caring for people and making a difference, no matter how small. But she had never allowed herself to pursue it. It was always about the next task, the next order. Now, with her newfound freedom, she could choose. It was time to help herself first, to learn how to stand up for herself and her own desires. The idea of helping others seemed like the perfect place to start. But how? Where? She had no formal education, no specific training. She had spent her life working in the background, hidden from the world. But she had something that no one could take away: experience. She had seen the suffering of others, the way people were treated as less than human, simply because of their status or their job. Maria knew she had the power to change that. She could help others find their voice, just as she was finding hers. It was in that moment that she made a decision. She would open a small center, a place where people who had been marginalized, who had been silenced, could come and find support. It wouldn't be anything grand at first, just a small space where people could find shelter and a sense of belonging. She didn't need much to start, just her determination and her heart. As soon as she made the decision, she felt a rush of excitement, but also a sense of fear. What if it didn't work? What if no one came? But she had to try. Vincent had given her the courage to believe in herself, and now, it was her turn to believe in the possibilities. The next few days were filled with planning. Vincent had offered to help her, to use his resources, but Maria was determined to do this on her own. She knew she had the strength to make it happen. She reached out to a few people she trusted, people who had been in similar situations, people who understood what it felt like to be invisible. They were eager to help, to contribute in any way they could. As the center began to take shape, Maria found herself overwhelmed with gratitude. She was creating something meaningful, something that would give others the opportunity to rebuild their lives, just as she had started to rebuild hers. The first day the center opened, Maria stood at the door, her hands trembling with nervous excitement. She had no idea who would show up, if anyone would show up at all. But as the doors opened, people began to trickle in, one by one. Some were shy, unsure of what to expect, while others were eager to share their stories. The room filled with people, each one with a unique story, each one with a need to be heard. Maria smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. This was it. This was her purpose. She was no longer a maid, no longer invisible. She was someone who had the power to make a difference. As the days passed, the center grew. More people came, more volunteers offered their time, and more lives were changed. Maria worked tirelessly, helping others find their voice, offering them the support they needed to rebuild their lives. Vincent stopped by every now and then, watching with quiet pride as Maria's dream unfolded before him. He had known, from the moment he met her, that she was capable of so much more than she realized. And now, she was living it. Maria had found her path, and she was walking it with purpose and strength. The past no longer held her captive. She had embraced her future, and it was bright. Maria stood in front of the center one evening, looking out at the quiet street, reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. The soft glow from the building's windows filled the street, a beacon of hope to anyone who needed it. What had started as a simple dream, one that felt distant and almost impossible, had become a reality. The center was thriving, helping those who had once been silenced by the weight of their circumstances. People came in with pain and left with purpose. each step taken toward healing because of Maria's determination to create a space where they could be seen and heard. Despite the successes, Maria was still adjusting to this life. The past few weeks had been filled with new faces, new stories, and new challenges. She found herself juggling the responsibilities of managing the center with her desire to remain grounded. The balance wasn't always easy, but she was learning, growing, and finding strength she never knew she had. As the days went on, Maria's reputation began to spread. People from all walks of life reached out, looking for a place to share their struggles. Volunteers came to help, offering their time, their expertise, and their hearts. The community that had once been closed off from her was now opening up. Vincent had been a constant presence in her journey, offering advice when she asked, supporting her without hesitation. Though he never interfered, his quiet strength and unwavering belief in her kept her focused. "You're doing something important here, Maria," Vincent had told her just the week before. His words echoed in her mind now as she stood there, watching the people in the center. They were all different, but there was one thing they shared: a need for respect, for care, for a place where they could find themselves again. "But am I enough?" Maria asked herself softly. It was a question that had been nagging at her for weeks. She had built something meaningful, something real, but she still felt as if there was more to do, more to give. She wasn't sure if she was truly ready for what came next, but the hunger for more change, more healing, more connections, was growing within her. It wasn't until that evening that Maria received the unexpected visit from Jessica's family. It had been months since the wedding, and she hadn't seen or heard from any of them since Vincent had intervened that night. She didn't know what to expect, but as they approached the center, Maria's heart raced. She was in the middle of a meeting, discussing plans for the next community outreach, when the door opened, and in walked Jessica's father. He looked older, his face drawn and tired, but there was something else in his eyes, something different from the arrogance he had once worn like armor. Behind him, Jessica stood, her head lowered, her posture much humbler than it had been during their last encounter. "Maria," her father said, his voice rough, "we owe you an apology." Maria stood up slowly, unsure of how to respond. She had been expecting anger or perhaps resentment, not an apology. "I'm sorry for how we treated you," he continued. "For all the years we looked down on you. For all the times we made you feel like you didn't matter. We were wrong." Maria didn't know how to respond. It was a moment she had never imagined. The people who had once humiliated her were now asking for her forgiveness. She had spent so many years in their shadow, trying to please them, trying to be invisible, that hearing them speak so plainly, so honestly, was overwhelming. Jessica stepped forward, her eyes filled with remorse. "I didn't understand what I was doing," she said softly. "I'm sorry, Maria. I hurt you, and I didn't even know it." Maria felt a knot in her chest. It wasn't that she needed their apology, it wasn't even about that anymore. She had moved beyond the point of seeking validation from them. But there was something about their words that allowed her to let go of the bitterness that had once weighed her down. "Thank you," Maria said, her voice steady, though her emotions were far from calm. "I appreciate your apology." Jessica's father nodded. "We've been watching you, Maria. We've seen what you've built here, what you've done for these people, and we're proud of you." The words hung in the air, like a weight being lifted from her shoulders. It was strange, hearing those words from them. But it wasn't the validation she had longed for that mattered. It was that she had built something greater than herself, something that would outlast them all. As they turned to leave, Jessica's father gave her one last look, a look of respect that Maria had never thought she would receive. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said. "You're changing lives." As the door closed behind them, Maria stood in the middle of the room, the words echoing in her mind. They weren't her words, they weren't her family, but they were a reminder. She was doing something that mattered, and she wasn't doing it for anyone else but herself. As the evening wore on, Maria found herself standing by the window again, watching the people walk past the center. The world outside seemed the same, but Maria was no longer the woman she once was. She had found her place in it, and she was no longer invisible. Weeks passed, and the center continued to flourish under Maria's steady leadership. More people from the community came to her for support, guidance, and a sense of belonging. The sense of fulfillment Maria felt from helping others, from creating a place where people were treated with dignity and respect, was unmatched. Each day, She grew more confident in her ability to not only run the center, but also to envision a future where it could expand, where she could reach more people in need. As Maria walked through the halls of the center one afternoon, she felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in years. The familiar hum of voices, the sound of laughter, and the occasional cry of a child filled the space, creating an atmosphere of warmth and hope. For the first time in her life, she was no longer just an observer, an invisible figure in the background. She was in control, leading with compassion and strength. Her mind wandered back to her first few days in the center, when everything had seemed so overwhelming. At that time, she had no idea where to begin. She was still working through the trauma of her past, and the weight of it all had been difficult to bear. But now, after months of hard work, she had found her rhythm. She was doing what she had always dreamed of, helping others to rebuild their lives, just as she was rebuilding her own. But Maria knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed support, just as she had offered support to others. One evening, as the last of the visitors left and the center began to empty for the night, Maria found herself sitting at her desk, staring at the papers in front of her. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but her mind kept racing. She had created something beautiful here, something that mattered. But how could she ensure its long-term success? How could she ensure that it would continue to make a difference for years to come? Just as the weight of the questions became too much, the door to her office opened quietly, and Vincent stepped in. "You look deep in thought," he said, his voice gentle, yet steady. Maria glanced up, surprised to see him. "I guess I am," she replied, offering him a small smile. "I've been thinking about the future, about how to make sure the center doesn't just survive, but thrives." Vincent smiled, his presence always calming. "That's a good thing to think about. But you also need to remember that you've already done so much. You've created a space where people can heal, and that's no small feat," Maria nodded, but the uncertainty still lingered. "It's not enough, though. I don't want this place to just survive. I want it to change lives, to grow, to reach more people." Vincent walked over to her desk, sitting down across from her. "Maria, you're already doing that. And the rest will come, in time. You've built the foundation. Now, you just need to trust the process." His words were like a weight lifting off her shoulders, but there was still a part of her that couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to be done. "But what if it's not enough?" she asked softly. "What if we run out of resources? What if we can't help as many people as we want to?" Vincent leaned forward slightly, his eyes meeting hers. "What if you gave yourself credit for what you've already done?" he asked, his voice low and sincere. "You've helped so many people already. You've created a place that wasn't here before. That's more than enough." Maria stared at him for a long moment, feeling the weight of his words sink in. He was right, of course. She had created something meaningful. But the drive to do more, to help more, was a part of her that she couldn't ignore. "I just want to keep going," she said finally, her voice filled with a mix of exhaustion and determination. Vincent smiled, a reassuring smile that made her feel like everything would be okay. "And you will," he said. "You've already proven that you can. Don't be afraid to lean on others when you need help. You don't have to carry this burden alone." Maria took a deep breath, her heart lightening. "Thank you, Vincent," she said, her voice soft. "For everything." "You've earned it, Maria," he replied, standing up and offering her a hand. "Now, let's make sure this place continues to grow. I believe in you." As Maria shook his hand, she realized that she was no longer the person she had been before. She wasn't the invisible maid, hiding in the background. She wasn't the woman who had been silenced by the world. She was a leader. She had found her voice, her purpose, and now, with Vincent's support and the support of the community she had built, she was ready to take the next step. The road ahead would not always be easy, but Maria knew one thing for certain. She was no longer afraid of the future. She was ready to face it, head on, and make a difference in the lives of others. As she stood there, looking out at the center, she realized that the possibilities were endless. She had already changed so much in such a short time. And now, the future was hers to shape. Maria stood at the entrance of the center, the early morning light casting a warm glow over the familiar, welcoming space. The once quiet building, filled with only the sound of her own thoughts and the occasional volunteer's voice, now echoed with the laughter and chatter of a thriving community. It had grown so much in the past few months. What started as a small idea, a sanctuary for those who had been left behind, had blossomed into a place of support, healing, and hope. As Maria watched the people walk in, many of them holding hands or chatting with each other, she couldn't help but smile. Each person who came through those doors had their own story, their own reason for seeking refuge. And Maria had made this possible. She had turned the broken pieces of her past into something beautiful. Yet, despite the success of the center, Maria still felt a deep sense of uncertainty lingering within her. There were days when the weight of her responsibilities felt like it might crush her. The center had grown, but with its growth came new challenges, financial strains, more people to manage, and, most recently, a growing demand for services that Maria wasn't sure how to fulfill. She knew she needed help, but asking for it, truly letting others in, had always been hard for her. She was used to doing everything herself, used to being the one who gave, but never took. It was a habit she had learned in her old life, a life where her needs had never mattered. As the morning progressed, Vincent arrived at the center, his presence as steady and reassuring as ever. Maria could tell something was on his mind the moment he walked in. His usual calm demeanor was tempered with a hint of concern. He approached her quietly, noticing the furrowed brow she hadn't been able to hide. "Something on your mind?" he asked, his voice gentle. Maria hesitated, biting her lip before nodding. "I'm just overwhelmed," she confessed, her voice quieter than usual. "This center, it's growing, and I want to keep up. I want to do right by everyone who comes here, but it's becoming harder to manage." Vincent studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Maria, you're doing more than enough. This place, it wouldn't be here without you. But you don't have to carry all of it alone." Maria felt a lump form in her throat. She appreciated his support more than he could know, but asking for help, truly leaning on someone else, still felt foreign to her. "I just don't know where to start," she admitted, her eyes casting downward. "I don't know how to let go." Vincent's expression softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder, a small gesture that meant more than words could convey. "Letting go isn't easy. It's something I've struggled with myself. But remember, you don't have to do everything at once. You can start by finding the right people to help you." Maria nodded slowly, her chest tight as she processed his words. She had built this center from the ground up, and it was hard to imagine handing over parts of it to others. Yet, deep down, she knew it was the only way forward. As they continued their conversation, a volunteer came in to give Maria an update on a recent project. Vincent excused himself to allow Maria to take the lead, and as he left, Maria realized just how far she had come. Not long ago, she would have been too afraid to take charge of anything, to even ask for help. But now, she was surrounded by a team of people who believed in her, who trusted her. They had made this possible, too. She wasn't alone. Later that week, after some careful consideration, Maria decided to take the first step in learning to trust others. She called a meeting with a few of her most dedicated volunteers, those who had been with her from the beginning, those who understood her vision and passion for the center. As they sat around the table, Maria took a deep breath and spoke. "I need your help. The center is growing, and I can't do this alone anymore. I've been running everything by myself, but it's time for me to step back and let others take charge of parts of this place. You all know what it means to me, and I want to make sure we continue to thrive." There was a moment of silence as her team exchanged glances, but then one of the volunteers spoke up. "Maria, we're here because we believe in what you've built. We're more than willing to step up and help however we can." The weight that had been pressing down on Maria's chest lightened a little as the words sank in. She was taking the first step toward letting go, toward trusting her team, toward building something even greater than before. The meeting was a turning point for her. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for the center, but for Maria herself. She had always believed that to be strong, she had to do everything on her own. But now, she realized that true strength came from knowing when to ask for help, from trusting others, and from allowing herself to share the responsibility. As the days went by, the center continued to grow, but so did Maria's sense of peace. She didn't have to carry the weight alone. Her community was there, supporting her every step of the way. And with each new challenge, Maria found herself growing stronger, not just as a leader, but as a person. She was no longer the invisible maid, the woman who had been silenced. She was Maria, someone who had taken the broken pieces of her past and turned them into something beautiful. And for the first time in her life, she was proud of what she had built. Months passed, and the center continued to grow, as did Maria. She had learned to lean on her team, to trust others with the work that had once been hers alone. With each passing day, the weight that she had carried for so long became lighter. Yet, as she watched the center expand, reaching more people than she ever thought possible, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. She had built something meaningful, something that mattered, but deep down, she knew she wasn't finished. The future was still waiting for her, and she had to find the courage to take the next step. As the center's success grew, so did the challenges. The demand for services was increasing, and the resources needed to meet that demand were starting to strain the small staff and volunteer team that had made the center possible. Maria found herself caught between the joy of seeing her vision come to life and the pressure of managing it all. One evening, after another long day of meetings and planning, Maria sat in her office, exhausted but determined. The quiet hum of the building outside her door reminded her of how far they had come. But she couldn't ignore the weight of the decision she had to make. How could she sustain this success, make it even more impactful, while keeping the heart of the center intact? She needed a bigger vision, a plan that would allow the center to flourish and continue its mission without burning out. The answer came unexpectedly when Vincent walked into her office one evening. He had been a constant source of support, and Maria trusted his judgment more than anyone else's. "You've built something incredible here, Maria," Vincent said, sitting across from her, his eyes filled with pride. "But I can see the strain on you. What are you thinking?" Maria leaned back in her chair, looking at the papers and files scattered on her desk. She had spent so many hours trying to figure it out on her own, but now, with Vincent's gentle guidance, she realized that she didn't have to figure it out alone. "I think it's time to expand," she said finally, her voice steady. "Not just in terms of space or resources, but in terms of vision. I want this center to reach more people, to become a place that is self-sustaining and capable of offering long-term support." Vincent smiled, clearly impressed by her clarity. "What do you need to make that happen?" he asked. Maria thought for a moment, feeling the familiar mix of excitement and fear. "I need to partner with organizations, with other people who share the same vision. I need to create programs that address not just immediate needs, but long-term goals. Education, job training, mental health support. These are things I know can make a real difference. But it requires resources, and I need to learn how to get those resources." Vincent's eyes sparkled with a mix of admiration and understanding. "That's a bold vision, Maria, and it's exactly what this community needs." Over the next several weeks, Maria worked tirelessly on her plan, consulting with experts, forming new partnerships, and researching ways to secure funding. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was no longer the woman who had once been invisible. She had built this from the ground up, and now she was ready to take it to the next level. She reached out to local businesses, government programs, and philanthropists who shared her passion for creating lasting change. Some were skeptical, others eager to help, but with each conversation, Maria's confidence grew. The response was overwhelming, and soon, she had the resources she needed to launch new programs. The center began to offer job training workshops, mental health support groups, and even a community garden where people could come together, learn, and grow. Maria's vision was taking shape, and the impact was undeniable. But with success came new challenges. As the programs expanded, so did the complexity of managing them. Maria found herself facing tough decisions, balancing the need for growth with the desire to maintain the center's core mission, to provide a safe space for people to heal, learn, and thrive. One afternoon, Maria was meeting with her team when a volunteer approached her with a concern. "Maria," she said, "I know you're trying to do so much, but I'm worried that we're spreading ourselves too thin. We can't help everyone if we're not focused on the people who need us the most." Maria paused, feeling the weight of the volunteer's words. It was true. She had been so focused on expanding the center's reach that she hadn't stopped to think about the heart of what they were doing. She had to remember why she had started this in the first place. "You're right," Maria said quietly, her voice filled with realization. "We need to make sure we're not losing sight of what matters. We need to focus on the people who need us most, and we need to build slowly, thoughtfully." The next few days were spent re-evaluating the center's approach, refining its goals, and realigning its efforts. Maria met with her team to discuss their priorities, focusing on quality over quantity. They decided to concentrate their efforts on the core programs that had the greatest impact on the community. As the center settled into this new phase of growth, Maria felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had learned an important lesson. Growth was essential, but not at the expense of the center's soul. It wasn't about expanding for the sake of expansion. It was about creating a lasting impact. And Maria was determined to make sure that impact would be felt for years to come. As the center continued to thrive, Maria knew that she had found her true calling. She had taken her past, her struggles, and her fears, and turned them into something meaningful. The future was bright, and for the first time, Maria was not afraid of what lay ahead. She was ready to face it, with strength, vision, and the knowledge that she was not alone. Maria stood in the center of the bustling room, surrounded by the very community she had built from the ground up. The air was filled with the sound of laughter, conversation, and the quiet hum of shared stories. It had taken time, effort, and countless sacrifices, but Maria had done it. She had created a space where people were valued, heard, and cared for, a place where healing was possible and new beginnings were within reach. As she glanced around, she saw the faces of those whose lives had been touched by the center. She saw the young mother holding her child, the elderly man chatting with a volunteer, the young woman who had found a job through the training program, and the man who had walked in broken but now stood tall, ready to face the future. These were the people Maria had dreamed of helping, and now they were living proof of the impact she had made. Her heart swelled with pride, but there was something deeper in her chest, something she hadn't fully acknowledged until this moment: gratitude. It had been a long road, filled with struggles, self-doubt, and moments when she had nearly given up. There were days when the weight of responsibility felt like too much to bear, and she questioned if she was really making a difference. But now, as she watched the community she had created, she knew she had. Vincent walked into the room, his steady presence bringing a sense of calm that Maria had grown to rely on. He smiled at her, his eyes filled with understanding. She had come so far from the woman who had once hidden in the shadows. The woman who had been afraid to stand up for herself, afraid to ask for help. Maria was no longer that woman. She had found her strength, her voice, and her purpose. "You've done it," Vincent said, his voice filled with pride. "This is exactly what you wanted to create. A place where people can heal, learn, and grow." Maria nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "It's not just me," she said quietly. "It's all of us. I couldn't have done it without the support of the community, the volunteers, and the people who believed in what we were building." Vincent's gaze softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You gave them that belief. You gave them a place to belong." Maria turned back to the room, her eyes scanning the faces around her. She saw the young woman who had once come in feeling lost, unsure of herself, now laughing with a friend she had made at the center. She saw the man who had been struggling with addiction, now proudly sharing his story with others. Each person in the room had their own story, but they all shared one thing in common. They were no longer invisible. They had found a place where they were seen, heard, and valued. And Maria had given that to them. It was then that Maria realized the true scope of what she had accomplished. It wasn't just about the center. It was about the lives she had touched, the people she had helped to reclaim their worth, the community she had built where no one was left behind. She had given them the tools to rebuild their lives, to heal from the pain that had once held them back. And in doing so, she had rebuilt herself, too. Maria had come from a place of silence and servitude, but now, she stood as a leader, as someone who had transformed her own life and the lives of so many others. There were still challenges ahead, and Maria knew that the journey was far from over. But she was no longer afraid of the future. She was ready for whatever came next. As the evening wore on, and the laughter and conversations continued to fill the air, Maria stepped outside for a moment of solitude. The night was quiet, and the stars above seemed to twinkle in approval, as if the universe itself was congratulating her. She took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill her lungs, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. This was her life now. The past was behind her, and the future was full of endless possibilities. She had created something that would last, something that would continue to help others long after she was gone. She had found her purpose, and it had led her to this moment, standing on the edge of something even greater than she had ever imagined. Maria smiled, a feeling of deep fulfillment settling in her chest. She had done it. She had turned her pain, her struggle, and her past into something beautiful. And now, as she looked at the future, she was no longer afraid. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that she had the strength, the community, and the courage to keep going. This was just the beginning. In this captivating journey of self-discovery, Maria builds a life that defies her past, turning a small dream into a thriving community center. The story explores themes of empowerment, transformation, and the importance of finding one's true purpose, all while touching the hearts of those who need it most. It's a tale that resonates with those who appreciate romance stories, where personal growth and healing are at the forefront. As Maria moves from a life of silence to a life of leadership, she learns the value of trust, support, and collaboration. Her center becomes a sanctuary for those seeking redemption, a place where no one is invisible. But as the story unfolds, Maria faces the challenge of balancing growth with maintaining the soul of the center. With the help of Vincent, who has always believed in her, she learns to let go of old fears and embrace the future. Through her story, readers will find inspiration and strength, as Maria's journey unfolds just like the most heartfelt romance stories. She doesn't just build a center, she builds herself, learning the importance of community, trust, and making a difference. Maria's growth mirrors the very best of romance stories, finding love for herself and the world around her, overcoming obstacles, and building something lasting and meaningful. With each step she takes, Maria steps further into her own potential, and the center flourishes, making an impact far beyond its walls. As the story concludes, Maria is no longer the invisible maid. She is a leader, empowered, and surrounded by a community that believes in her. Her transformation is the heart of this journey, one that mirrors the most beautiful romance stories where resilience, love, and personal transformation are at the core. It's not just a story about building a center. It's a story about building a future, one that reflects the very best in us all.